We said that the level at which you communicate is the level at which you live. Now, communication is a large subject, I know. We spent the other week, entire weekend in Atlanta, just discussing Friday, Saturday, Sunday on communication. So it is a large subject. I've said already that 80% of all our problems in marriage have to do with communication, and the other 20% depend on it. So it's very important and interrelated in all of our marriage relationships. So happiness and health in a marriage depends so much on our communication. Blessed, I say, are those who learn how to communicate, who share at what we call the who level, who are willing, ready to share what is going on, both in our happiness and our sad points. And then it is that we begin to learn to love each other. And I remind you again of Erich Fromm's statement. Remember that love can only grow by fuller revelation. There must be, we said, the safety of expression. All of us will share only to the extent that we feel will be loved and accepted. By the way, that's an important one also when we talk about relating to our children. As they feel loved and accepted, then also communication, openness happens in our relationship. We talked a little bit about active listening. We could talk quite a while on that one. That as we listen, not only with words that are being said, but we call it the third ear, to hear what people are really feeling underneath those words is another level of communication. Someone mentioned to me a while ago about the whole fact of we think a lot of the time the person who uses a lot of words is the one that's communicating. And isn't the extrovert the real communicator? And I say not necessarily at all. We usually think of it in those terms, but it is often also the introvert who is communicating in 100 different ways as well. By the way that person responds in bodily language, the way that person responds in touch, the way that person listens. And listening, of course, is a big part of communication. Most of us know too little about real listening, and yet the introvert is the one who is more inclined to be, I think, a good listener. And that person, by listening, is communicating a lot of love. Very, very important. So we share, I say, to the extent we'll be accepted, loved, appreciated. There's too much, no doubt, passive listening. In counseling, time and time again, I hear the statement, one makes a remark, and the other responds by saying, well, I never heard you say that before. And you know what comes back? The other person says, I told you 1,000 times, you know. Isn't it strange that in the close relationships of life we can talk, but really not hear each other? And so we make statements, and suddenly it dawns on us at times what really the other person is saying. So I can't stress enough the fact that if we're to communicate, then it's going to take some time together. Love is spelled how? T-I-M-E. And if you don't have time for each other, most marriages would never happen if the quantity and the quality of time was as poor before marriage as it is after marriage. So that's awfully important to think of time. A real test comes in the life of a couple when the first child is born. The question now is, will they devote primary attention to the child, or will they keep their own relationship first? The way I say it is, the partnership is permanent, parenthood is passing. So keep the partnership in good repair, and parenting will take pretty good care of itself. It's one of the reasons why I suggest that every time a couple has a child, they ought to also have perhaps a retreat for parents, because the temptation is to divert all the attention to the child And when that happens, their own relationship will suffer and the child will suffer too. Now, Gary Chapman, who's a marriage family counselor, wrote something that's become rather familiar to us, I think, and that is the 5 love languages. He now has some other books, I believe, that have to do with love language of children and otherwise. I've taken these at times and just enlarged on them, that is, used the 5 love languages, commenting then with my own illustrations, say at sweetheart banquets or at retreats and the like. And I'd like to do that for a short while today. Gary says that each of us has a primary love language. And what often happens is we marry a person who has a different love language than we have. And we may wonder sometimes why we miss each other, not only in marriage, but in other relationships. We may wonder at times why we miss each other in the church and can't meet each other's need. And maybe we're trying to love the other person the way we feel they need to be loved, rather than the way that person needs to be loved. Now, I've found, too, that husband and wife often have a different love language. And we are inclined, I think, naturally, to seek to love the other person the way we feel the need to be loved, rather than the way the other person needs to be loved. So I'd like you to think while I go through these, what is my primary love language? And if you want to, think also, what is my spouse's primary love language? The first one is words. That is, there are those who, when you say, I love you, I appreciate you, thank you, dear, you look beautiful tonight, you're a good cook, you're a good provider. These are words that to this person have special meaning for love. And while we all feel loved with sincere words of appreciation, the verbal, yet these persons have that as a primary love language. And for these, it's not enough to say, well, he or she ought to know I love him. No, they need words of love. It's not enough to say, I work 60 hours a week, I bring home the bacon, I do the laundry, I make the meals. And although we said that only about 7% of our communication is through words, yet for these, it's awfully important. I remember at our 40th anniversary, I wrote to Betty 40 reasons why I love you. That's only one way of expressing love, but for some, that is the important way to feel loved. The next one we want to look at is that of gifts. To some, gifts is a primary love language. This is a person who says he loves me or she loves me, maybe has gone out of the way to buy a little gift, select it with care, brings it home, shares it with me. This person feels very loved, is thinking about me, cares enough to get me something special. Now, the size of the gift here isn't the important thing. I think it's Shedd who says that it can be a rose in a gargle bottle. You see, that isn't the important thing, the size of the gift, but rather it can be even a card, a letter, but it is to this person an evidence of love that you've taken time and effort to give something special in showing your love. Now, the third is action. And John does say in his epistle, love not only in word, but also in deed. A person like this is inclined to say, sure, you say you love me, but why don't you do something around the place sometime? Maybe if you'd pick up your clothes, or you'd help with the dishes, or if you'd make a special meal, or if you'd just clean up the place once. This person would feel loved. I remember a couple coming from a nearby town there in Virginia, and somewhere in our conversation, he said, she wants me to express love to her. And I say, why doesn't you clean up the place sometime? What did she say right back? If I do, he doesn't appreciate it. He came back again. It's been a long time, he said, since she made a good meal. She came right back and said, well, if I do, he doesn't say thank you. You get the two? She'd have been overwhelmed, you see, if he'd have just expressed a little appreciation. And he wanted action around the place. He wanted to do something, and then he would have felt loved. I had a case of another person who told me that she took a good part of her day to make a meal that she knew her husband enjoyed. He came home, she said, sit down, ate the meal. He left again without any words of appreciation. She told me, I was so furious. I didn't know what to do. The next morning, she said, I received at my door a dozen roses. And I was so mad, I refused them. See how we missed each other? Those are rather clear ones, aren't they? But one was expressing it the wrong way. The roses, he thought, was a way to express his love. And he missed the whole thing again with a woman who would have been overwhelmed if he just said thank you, expressed appreciation in that time together. Now I come back to one that we talked about previously. And Gary says, number 4 is time. Love is spelled T-I-M-E. And here it means, of course, undivided attention. Like you gave before marriage, you see. Like you planned to spend time together. You made appointments together. You called it dating time together. And this means then in marriage, not simply sitting in the same room together. It means not simply watching TV together. That's not the time this person needs. It's time to look into each other's eyes. I've asked couples that at times in retreats, how long has it been since you looked into each other's eyes for 15 seconds? And then, where we have a little more time like that, I sometimes ask them to stand, take each other's hands, look into each other's eyes for 15 seconds. I'll time you. And to show what powerful communication that is, you can imagine what happens. Oh, there are a few who just sort of go like this. And, they don't quite make it. But most of them burst out laughing, which says that it's a powerful means of communication. So, to look into each other's eyes, we miss it so often with children, by the way. You see, children are down there where all they see go past them all day long are legs. And then when they talk to us, we keep right on saying, yeah, no, and keep doing our thing instead of getting down there and really looking into their eyes. Miss one of the best forms of communication there is. Sometimes they need to pour head over, to look into their faces. They know more about it seems, than we do at that point. To take a walk together, to hold each other. And again, for these whose primary love language is time, you see, gifts will not do it. Gifts will not do it. In fact, I think it's Chapman himself who tells the story of a man who went all out for his wife's birthday. He bought her an expensive gift, and when she went through those gifts at the party, she came to that one, she said, oh, that's nice, and went right on to the next one. He said the same evening, after the guests had left, she said to her husband, dear, it seems to me sometimes that you really don't love me. And he said, woman, what in the world is wrong with you? He said, I spent $900 good bucks for that gift, and you say I don't love you. And she said, well, it seems as though you never really have any time for me. So what's her love language? Well, your guess is pretty well. Mine is that time was much more important. The next one is touch. Now, touch has always been a way of communicating love. The hand on the shoulder, the hug, loving kiss, the embrace, all of these ways in which we have to show love by touch. In a recent article I read, it said that French families touch each other 6 times more than American families do. It was primarily an article that had to do with parent-child relationships, where parents in France touch their children so much more than Americans do. But I judge that we have a lot to learn, too, when it comes to touch. And this is a primary way of communicating. To take hands as we walk together. You know, living next to a college community and university community for some years, where they hang all over each other, you know. Betty and I, one day, were talking about this, and we said, well, why can't we as grayheads show that we care about each other a little too, you know? And so one of the things we decided was, well, we're going to join hands when we walk together. And that's very interesting to see grayheads doing that. We walking shortly after that over toward the college, and here come a guy toward us, and he looked at us a little strange and said, I don't know about that. And I said, what don't you know about? He said, holding hands like that. I said, we know a lot more than the kids over at the college do about that. Well, we were walking in at the mall, and like usual, we walked with our hands joined, and almost I felt a tap on my shoulder, and a tall guy looking down on me there, and he said, are you old enough to do that? And I said, well, you know, we've been married, 40-some years. And, oh, I know, he said. He said, I'm from Texas. I need direction and thought you'd be a good guy to ask. Then another time we were coming down the center of town, stopped at a red light, and I glanced up in my mirror and noticed that a couple in the car back of me were making good use of the time. And just then the light changed, and we had to go, and I said to Betty, we missed it. We missed it. I just wish I had a few more seconds. I could have pulled her over, you know, and shown them they don't have anything in us. Well, touch, little things. I remember at one of our assemblies, after we were coming out one morning, the first morning, going down to the assembly meeting, Betty and I came down as usual, with hands joined, walking with droves of people, you know, toward the assembly. And as I looked around on purpose, really, I don't know whether I saw another couple that had joined hands. But do you know what happened? And I like to take the credit where I can. You know, a couple mornings later, we saw numbers of people joining hands walking in that crowd from that hotel down through there. I don't know whether they caught on or not. But the first morning, you know how they walk sometimes about 5 steps ahead of his wife, you know, and so forth. Well, that's another way. 3 squeezes of the hand, touch. I don't know if you use that in your family or not, but our grandchildren have caught on to that one. You know, where you give each other 3 squeezes of the hand. I love you. They catch on to that before they can talk, nearly. And our grandson has another way in which he thinks it ought to be done yet, and that is as they hold hands, as they always do around the table. Then he thinks before you pray, or before you finish, when you finish your prayer, you give each other 3 squeezes of the hand that go all around the table before you start eating. Well, children catch on to that so quick, and it's just another way of expressing love with touch. So each of us likely is different. I don't know if you sized up your own. Which is your primary love language? Do you have one? I think you do. Someone said, maybe I need them all. And that's true. We do need them all. But it is helpful, I think, to think, what is my primary one and what is my spouse's primary one? And I've done it. I've done it with enough hundreds of couples, not only in this country, but some other countries, that I could pretty well tell you today what is the primary language of most wives and what is the primary language of most men. But I don't plan to tell you that. One is not better than another, you see. They're all good. there's a sense in which we need them all. On the other hand, we probably have a primary love language, and so do each of our children. Think about it. We may be able to love them in new ways as we think, what is the primary way in which that child responds? What is the primary way in which we respond to each other and grandchildren, whatever we have? Well, these have been rather stimulating for me, and in sharing them with multitudes of couples across the country, I found that it may be a challenging way to think of how we communicate in these very simple ways and yet very effective ways in our lives together.